Welcome, everyone. Welcome. If this is your first time at a Teen Science Cafe, we are so happy to have you. I'm going to give it a moment to allow everybody to come on in. So just while you are waiting, I'm going to ask you to just check the participant list and make sure that your name appears who you are. And if it doesn't show up as you, could you please rename yourself, put your first name and the last initial, just so we need to know who's here. I do match it up against the registration list. And if I can't find you on the registration list, I will be private messaging you to make sure that I know who is here. So what you can do is you find your menu, click on the participant list, and your name would show up right at the top of the participant list when you open it. And just make sure you see how your name is showing up. And if it's not showing up as you, please rename yourself. Greatly appreciate that. So I'm going to get us started. I do want to let you know we have closed captioning available today. And I'm going to pop into the chat right now a link. If you need to use our closed captioning, if it just helps you, follow along better by seeing it in text, then go ahead, click on that link that I just put into the chat, and you can follow along today's presentation. So I do want to introduce myself. My name is Lauren Traster, and I am the 4-H Teen and Leadership Program Coordinator here with the Vermont 4-H program. And we would love to know who all has joined us today. So find your chat box and tell us who you are and where you're from. And we'd love to know, we know that we get participants from Vermont and beyond. So always curious where in Vermont you're from and where in the country you might be from. So please open the chat, just take a minute and let us know who's here. Hi, Ruth from Craftsberry. Glad you could join us. I know that there's more than just Ruth here today. So if everyone can go ahead and do that. We really enjoy knowing it. I see, okay. I got a private message. I won't read that out loud. Hi, Eliana. Oh, it's so glad to join you. Eliana joined me this summer for a couple of programs. Sterna, I remember you from last year. You came to a lot of Teen Science Cafes. Fantastic. Carly's here from Springfield. Who else is with us today? Gabby. Gabby's back again. I remember you from last year. And Matthew's with us from California. Oh, but you're in Vermont right now. All right. Very good. So go ahead, keep introducing yourselves. While you do that, remember, if your name doesn't appear as who you are, please go ahead and change it so I know who's here. And keep introducing yourselves in the chat. I'm going to just go over our Zoom land protocols or Zoom guidance for when we're having Teen Science Cafes. So we're going to ask that you stay muted unless you want to ask a question. So for those of you who have come in the past, you did not have the opportunity to unmute yourself or ask a question. You didn't even have the opportunity to be on video. We are using Zoom meeting this time. So if you want to ask a question you can type it into the chat. You can share your thoughts in the chat. You can respond to our presenter in the chat. But if you want to ask a question and actually, use your voice, we encourage that. We're just going to ask that you raise your hand. And that's a button that will be found if you look at your name on the participant list. There's an option to raise your hand. And we just ask that you wait for us to call on you before you unmute yourself. We ask that you just be courteous and respectful of everyone that's here today. And because you have the option of having your video on, it's not required. You can be here with video on, you can be here with video off. But if your video is on, we just ask that you don't create any distractions. Make sure there's nothing weird going on behind you. Don't be moving around your house, stay in one location. And then, most importantly, just stay engaged and participate fully. We have a great topic tonight, which we're going to get to in a moment. But I want to just be able to tell you about a few other programs that we're offering this fall that you might be interested in. So obviously tonight is the first of many teen science cafes. We have several that are going to be virtual on Tuesday nights, but more important, we have a few in-person cafes scheduled for this fall. We have one coming up on Saturday, October 16th, and another one on Saturday, November 13th. So we'd love for you to come on the UVM campus and join us for those. We serve free pizza, so it's always, at least your stomach will be satisfied. But I guarantee you the topics are really, really exciting this year. There's a Youth Environmental Summit coming up at the end of October. There's a live virtual portion of it, and then there's a month-long where you can access pre-recorded workshops. Really exciting topics, really interesting. So if you're into environmental science, environmental policy, advocacy, whatever it might be, I encourage you to check it out. On Thursday night, we're starting another Learn to Code program. We're going to be learning in Scratch how to create a game. So that's something you could still sign up for. And then we also have, if you are interested in the environment, we do a program where we train teens to teach younger students some environmental lessons. It's a program called Try for the Environment. We also have a leadership weekend coming up. And news isn't even on our website yet, but I'm going to be posting it by the end of the week. We have a really exciting opportunity to learn a little bit about geographic information systems with a GIS specialist out of California. And that's going to be posted hopefully by the end of the week. That's going to be 2 sessions in November. And it's sounding really cool. I'm excited for that one. Gabby asked, will you have any more virtual teen science cafes? Yes. So if you go to the website that's listed here, look at our fall schedule. There are several virtual cafes. It's like one a month. There's this month, one in October, one in November, and then one in December. And then we'll do it again, January, February, March, April, so on. But right now we only have the fall schedule listed. A great question. Thank you for that. So let's get to the good stuff for tonight. We have an exciting cafe coming right up, but I want to introduce our presenter. You're going to be hearing and learning about Develecology. And let me just tell you a little bit about Lawrence Shelton, also goes by Larry, and he can tell you which he prefers. But he is an associate professor in the Human Development and Family Studies program at the University of Vermont. Larry attended Harvard College and then he earned a master's and a PhD in child psychology at the University of Minnesota. His recent book is an introduction to the field of develecology based on the work of, I can't read my own stuff right now, Urie Bronfenbrenner. Did I say that right?
You did.
He teaches, writes, and lectures on a wide range of topics, illustrating the use of develecology to understand current issues in development, families, and communities. So let's all give Professor Shelton a warm welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. It's fun to be the first and a little intimidating. I have to figure out how it works, and then I have to be exciting. You said that. Okay, I'll see if I can be exciting. And if I'm not, just try not to snore too loudly. Okay, so let me share my screen. Is that time? Okay.
Yes, sorry, I muted myself. And Gabby, what do you mean by the first? The first of the fall schedule. We have had many virtual cafes before tonight, but this is the first of our fall 2021 schedule.
Right. The new year. Okay, and it's just barely fall. So that's the topic. You've already seen that. And let me tell you what I'm going to try to do. And just to give you some heads up, we will end at 8. We'll try to stop a couple of minutes early because Lauren has some work for us to do then. And I will stick around if we're not completely done. If there are still more questions, leave whenever you need to quietly. Don't trip on anything as you go out. Do that gracefully. And I'll stick around as long as anyone has a question or wants to talk about the topic of develecology. So for the next 50 minutes or so, I'd like to try to introduce the field of develecology. And I should ask first, are any of you familiar with it? Have you heard of develecology?
We're getting a few no's.
Okay. Well,
Don't worry, I didn't know what it was either.
Okay. I would have been surprised if anyone had, because this is a very new science, and that makes it very exciting to be working in the very beginning of a field. I've actually been working in it for a number of years, even before I knew what it was called. So I'll explain how I got into develecology, and before the evening is out, describe how we use develecology to understand human development. How many of you are familiar with the concept of development? Most of you?
Yeah, it seems we're getting a few I ams in the chat.
Okay, that's good. I think we talk about development a lot when we talk about babies, we talk about children developing. And how many of you think that your development is affected by the environment you live in?
Ruth says me. Carly says I do. Gabby says probably.
Probably, okay. Good. I think we're fairly used to thinking about the environment that we live in, and that environment might include our families, our homes, our schools, the community we live in. And we're fairly used in our society and our culture to thinking that people are shaped in some way by the environment that they live in. We talk about the environment of poverty, or people who live in an affluent community. And we're fairly familiar, I think, with assuming that the development that we're going through is shaped by the environment and the experiences that we have in the environment. So we'll proceed to talk a little bit about that. And here's an example of how some things are shaped literally by the environment that they're in. If you've grown gourds, or if you have purchased gourds, you often see them in strange shapes. And there are people who grow gourds in molds. And this is an example of that. Sometimes people will put a gourd in a small box while it's very little, and then it grows into the shape of the box. So you can have a square box-shaped gourd, or into a round bottle or a jar, and people can shape them in that way. And I don't think that we think about our development as being quite that influenced by the environment that we're in. But we all are probably shaped a bit by the experiences we have in the environment. Now, let me talk a bit about my development. in this field. I'm not going to go back to my infancy and talk about how I grew up or where, but I started in college, in high school, middle school and high school, where you are. I studied the same things you do. I suspect math and science and social studies and literature. And when I got to college, I studied those things as well, but I also happened to take a couple of courses on child development and families. And I didn't know that those kinds of courses existed when I got to college, but it turned out that that was a fascinating topic. And so I continued in it. I majored in studying families and children. And along the way, I had some experiences, volunteering and work experiences, that gave me the opportunity to see and work with people who had significant problems in life. I volunteered in a state mental hospital, working with adults who were long-term patients in a psychiatric hospital in Boston. And one of the things I learned there was that I was not likely to want to work with adults with that kind of severe problem. But I also learned that if many of these people had had different childhoods, or if their problems had been addressed when they were little, when they were children or maybe teenagers, they might not have ended up in a psychiatric hospital. I also worked in a residential treatment center for children with severe emotional disturbances, and discovered that some kids have pretty severe experiences, traumatic experiences of all different kinds. And they were in an environment, a residential treatment center, where we were trying to fix their problems. We were trying to help them develop in a more normal fashion. And over a period of years, I was only there a brief time, but over the years, many of these kids did get better and were able to live relatively normal lives. I got interested in understanding experience in environments, and I went off to graduate school to learn more about children's problems and their families, and therapy, treatment. And treatment means trying to change the direction that kids are developing in, and to help them understand the things that have happened to them. Along the way, after I came here, I taught child development, I taught adolescent development, lifespan development. And for years and years, I have focused on understanding the ecosystem, the environment that people are in, and how that shapes their development, and how we might change ecosystems or environments to reduce the problems that people experience and to promote development. So most of my career, the last several decades, has been helping people understand development and learn to understand the ecosystems and how people's experience might be different if they were in different places. So that's how I got here. And along the way, I've watched the field of child development and human development change drastically. And I never studied adults until I was teaching about adults and development across the lifespan. And we know that kids develop from, well, actually from a single cell and a fertilized cell. And I'm sure you've had good courses on how that happens. And we go from that single cell at conception through great biological development and cognitive development as we grow up, and social development, development in different spheres of our life. And we go through the whole lifespan. I've been through a lot of it, and I'm getting into that later adulthood stage and still being shaped by the environments that I'm in. The children develop from conception to death. They become adolescents and then adults. And we understand that development is shaped by the environment. And in the early part of my career, we didn't have very good understanding of how that happened. But we know that children sometimes develop problems. Adults do too. And we know that fixing problems means changing development. And that probably means interfering in a person's environment. Now, one of the things that's happened in science generally is that we pay a lot of attention to the notion of a system. And I have seen in the field of human development much more attention to systems of development. So I want to go back a little bit and see what youth understand about systems. Do you know what a system is? How many of you are familiar with it? A system.
If you want to raise your hand and unmute yourself, you can give it a go. And you want to give that a try, or just use the chat. One or the other. Oh, we do have a raised hand from Sturna. All right, I'm going to unmute you. Let's see. All right, so you're going to have to, there you go. Okay.
Hi. So I think a system is like for an ecosystem, right? Everything has to work together in order to function. So if part of the system isn't working, then everything else can't work. So a system is like a lot of different pieces that go together in order to work as a whole, I think.
Exactly. Great. And let me give you a formal definition. There are several, but Sturna is exactly right. It's a set of parts or components, or sometimes we call them elements, pieces, that are connected to each other in some way, so that when any one part operates or is changed, other parts respond in ways that change the function of the whole set. Okay. So if something is part of a system, it has to be connected somehow to the other parts. And if a part is there that doesn't change in any way, it may not be really part of that system. Okay, clear enough? Okay. And Sturna gave us the example of an ecosystem. So are there other systems that you're familiar with? Just off the top of your head? Okay.
Let's see. Gabby, why don't you unmute yourself?
Okay, well, I was actually just learning about this, about something kind of similar, about body systems in science today, like in like systems inside like animals' bodies. I was actually just learning about that in science today. And like systems, like an example of a system could also be like inside your body or inside an animal's body, and you know, all the parts have to work together to do functions.
All right, great, and exactly right. That's a great example. So are most of you more or less familiar with system in that way? If you are, we can move quickly ahead and I'll look at some examples. Sometimes I have to explain in detail what a system is and give lots of examples. So I'll rush through that. Okay, here's a mechanical system. Some of you may be interested in cars. This is a system of parts. and they're all connected to each other unless the car isn't working well and things have come unconnected. But it has an engine which has many parts to it, and the driver has an accelerator. And when you push on the accelerator, it lets more gas into the engine, and the engine moves faster. It has a brake which can slow the whole car down by slowing the wheels. And I don't need to go through all of the ways that the pieces of a car are connected, but they're bolted together, they're electrically connected, they're operated by levers, like the accelerator and the brake. And we have lots of systems that operate like that. So here's a different kind of system. This is a natural system. This one happens to be the water cycle that looks at what happens to the water in the world. And you probably, if you haven't studied this, you'll memorize it at some point. We have water at the surface that evaporates, forms clouds. Plants also transpire and give out vapor. It condenses into clouds, and then at some point it rains, like in Vermont, and goes back to the surface, runs downhill. Some of it soaks in to become groundwater, and we have pools of water under the surface that we rely on. And this is an endless cycle all over the world. Another, well, let me say, we have lots of examples of mechanical systems and natural systems. But a number of years ago, a German philosopher, actually, who's called the father of systems theory, wrote many books about systems, but one of them that was very popular is called General System Theory. And he looked at the types of systems that we experience and noted that systemic thinking in terms of systems and the parts, was a complex kind of thinking. And it was necessary in every scientific field. So we had to learn to teach about systems and to talk about them. So he wrote about how all systems are similar, but also the different kinds of systems. And the one that has been most important to me is his discussion of living systems. And a living system has parts that are not like the parts in a car or the parts generally in natural systems. Living systems have parts that change. And that's a very important component or feature of living systems because they change on their own. They are living organisms. The living system has organisms that have a developmental path, a developmental history. So if you think about a living system, its connections to the other parts change when any one of the parts changes. Are you familiar with the concept of adaptation?
We have a couple of yeses, but we do have a no. So you may want to just give a quick description of that.
Okay. All right. Adaptation is what creatures do when any part of their environment changes. So we talk about evolution when a species changes, and we think about adaptation over a long period of time. Right now, adaptation is happening in Vermont as we see the environment warming. Our winters are getting shorter And birds and other organisms that didn't used to live here are moving north as the environment changes. They are adapting their habitat to take advantage of the fact that their ecosystem has changed. Okay? We see concern about the maple sugar industry. Are maple trees going to stop producing as much as they have? And this past year was one, because the weather was unusual and we had a very short sugaring season, and we didn't produce nearly as much maple syrup as we do in other years. So hopefully the maple trees are not going to maintain that adaptation, but it could be that they will. We don't know. We can only watch over time, over years of time. Okay? You adapt when you change schools or when you go from one class to another. Okay? One of the things that I've studied over my career is how people adapt when they have children. Becoming a parent is a huge change. And then as our children grow up, we continue to change because we're adapting to the changes in our children. There's a question you can ask your parents. It's a fun question. And maybe you've asked them, but how did being your parent change them? Okay? You can just tuck that away sometime when you're bored. Ask your parents how parenting you has changed them. They have adapted to the changes that you go through. It's a fun concept. So adaptation generally is changing to fit better with the environment that you're in. Okay. And there we go. And when we adapt in a system, when a system adapts, the connections change, the way parts are related changes, and all the parts are likely to change or to adapt. So living systems are incredibly complex to study because you have to pay attention to how each part is changing and how the connections between parts change. So living systems are hard to study. They're hard to think of, but it's really important because in my field, I'm interested in people and I'm interested in families and I'm interested in how people who are developing are adapting to changes in their ecosystems. And we'll explore that a little farther. Living systems include, and I think it was Gabby who said there were components in the body. So we have a skeletal system. I'm going to flip through some of these. We have a nervous system. If you ate dinner tonight, your digestive system is working. Oh, that's gory. And enough systems. Well, let's move on to the complex ones. How do you understand the term ecology? And I'm gonna move quickly now for a little bit. I think some of these are things that you've studied. But ecology is the study of relations of organisms to each other and to their physical surroundings. So studying ecology is studying living systems. That's why ecology sometimes is so complex. And what's an ecosystem? An ecosystem is a community of interacting organisms and their surrounding environment. So we talk about a pond ecosystem, the community of organisms around a pond, including the pond. We talk about urban ecosystems. What are the organisms and how do they relate to each other in a city. That's a fascinating field. So we have ecology and ecosystem. We have studies like the relationship between the number of rabbits and the number of foxes. That one's been important in our neighborhood because we had a group of houses built down the road and they displaced the fox and the foxes that bred every year. And the rabbits expanded, more and more rabbits, and that was bad for the gardens. And we were trying to figure out how to get a fox to come back. Well, foxes seem to come where the rabbits are numerous. So this summer we have only a few rabbits and we see the fox regularly. So we're hoping he sticks around. But the number of foxes will also increase as long as there's lots of food. Okay, so that's a typical ecological connection between organisms. We have forest succession. Okay? If you have a fire, what happens to the forest? And people study the sequence of plants that grow and how they relate to each other. And particularly, I'm interested in living human systems, the family system. Yeah. Another family system. Yeah. There's an Indian family system. And in a family, people have different roles and they relate to each other. And as each child or each person changes, as they develop, the whole family system changes. And that's just absolutely incredibly complex to study, but also incredibly fun to study. And much of our human ecology is practiced in the study of families. Now, where are we? Okay, so we've talked about human development, systems, ecosystem, and what the field of child development, human development has been doing the last 20 or 30 years is trying to combine a developmental perspective, the understanding that people change and everybody changes all across the lifespan. We're trying to combine that perspective with an ecological perspective to look at how development is shaped by the ecosystem that we participate in. And people have wanted to do that for a long time. The difficulty has been that we haven't until fairly recently had good systems for understanding the ecosystem. We understand people pretty well and how they develop, but the research that we have has been very frustrating because it rarely looks at the ecosystems people live in. And that's been the case since I was in graduate school. It's been frustrating that we haven't really done the research on the ecosystems people live in and how those affect their development. We have scattered studies, lots of studies that don't tell us very much. So what we're trying to do is create a field of developmental ecology. And that's what we've shortened to Develecology. So we have biological ecology, we have social ecology, and now we have, over the last 20 years or so, Develecology. The ecosystem and the organism and the organism's development as the field of study.
Larry, can I interrupt for a second?
Please.
To just help everyone maybe give a picture of this? Are you saying with this idea of understanding how people develop within their environment, is it looking at, say, you know, how did I develop as a young girl growing up in Maine versus if I grew up in an urban, say, New York City? So did I develop a certain way because I grew up in a neighborhood with trees and I could ride my bike safely versus, in New York City where maybe I couldn't ride my bicycle or go out to play safely. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
That's a great example, Lauren. And my students often look at the differences among them, depending on whether they had a natural world to explore, whether they could go out in the woods, whether they had to drive to get to places, where could they walk when they were teenagers, where were their friends from, because the ecosystem shapes all of those and many more. I'm particularly interested in what happens if your family is not very functional. For example, if you get traumatized or one of your parents is an alcoholic or a drug addict, what does that do to the family system and how does that affect your development? We have a lot of interest nationally in trauma and the fact that people are traumatized in war environments. They're traumatized in neighborhoods with a high crime rate. They're traumatized by their parents sometimes. And to understand how those experiences in the environment shape their development is important for figuring out what we can do about the problems that they develop. So a lot of our research is serious because it's about the kinds of things that create real problems for people. And for example, we have recent studies that indicate that the more trauma you experience, the more different trauma you experience as a child, the more health problems you're going to have as an adult and the shorter your lifespan. Now, that's pretty serious, but it requires a developological perspective to tease that out. And then we'll talk in a minute about how developology helps us address those kinds of problems. Are there other questions about where we are right now? Yeah. So we've got
there was a question in the chat when you had shown the picture of the Indian family and said, mentioned an Indian family system. The question is it particularly different? So is the Indian family system different than other family systems?
Yeah. It may be, yes. And generally, anthropologists and sociologists look at the way a particular culture supports families and what kind of relationships it's likely to have. So we can talk about different kinds of family systems in different parts of the world and look at how people relate to each other in that particular culture. And that is an ecological perspective. And we see that personalities develop and the kinds of problems people have as they develop are different in different cultures. Great question. Okay, let me add one of the great men in developmental psychology. John Piaget was a Swiss biologist. And as a biologist, he studied how species adapt to their environments. And what he gave us many years ago was the notion that intelligence is a biological adaptation that we evolved over all of the span of time that humans have been evolving. And the unique thing about humans is that individuals adapt to their experience in the environment across their lifetimes. So we are always adapting. And intelligence, our understanding and our skills in the world develop as we develop biologically. And the experiences that we have in the environment are important to develop our intelligence. So that's another example. And in his particular case, He was studying development in many ways and looking at the relationship between people and their environments, looking at the kinds of experiences that people have in their environments. And we've taken that notion into Develecology. It's very important to think about individual development over time in context, in places, and the activities that people engage in to explore their environment and how that helps their understanding. So Piaget's notion that we've incorporated into Develecology is that we develop our understanding by exploring the environment. It doesn't come to us, it's not given to us before we're born. We start developing by exploring and experiencing our environment. And we develop our understanding and the skills that we have and our motivation by engaging, exploring, interacting with the physical and the social environment around us. Okay, so we've got this notion that the ecosystem is really important to human development. And then a guy named Urie Bronfenbrenner, and Lauren mentioned him earlier, who was a child psychologist, the same kind of training I have. He was frustrated because we didn't have a way to study our environments. And he set out about 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, to create a way of thinking about the environment. And I'm not going to go through his whole notion, but his framework has become the basis for Develecology. And he tried, as a human ecologist, he called himself, he tried to think about development in ecological terms. And in doing that, he needed to define development in a way that would make the environment important in it. So it became not just something we say that people are shaped by their environment, but what's the role of the environment? And in his case, his definition, and I'm just going to run through this quickly. People develop by acquiring or gaining a more extended and valid understanding of their environment. He said that is development. That's how you develop as a human being. You're understanding your environment, and you're able or skilled at engaging in activities that will help you in that environment. Now, that's a really radical way to talk about development, but it puts ecology right at the middle of what we're doing. And that has become the central theme in Develecology. How is it that people understand their environment and that we become skilled at dealing with it? So that the basic understanding of Develecology is that we're looking at development and we're looking at a person beginning and developing an understanding of the environment. Now that puts the environment right in the middle and around the individual. So think about how complex that is. Can you describe your environment? What are the important parts? That should be parts of your environment. What have been the important experiences you've had in your environment that have helped you develop an understanding of life? Could you answer those if I gave you an hour? Could you describe your environment? Any thoughts about that?
Oh, we have some yeses and a maybe.
Any takers?
Anyone want to try to describe their environment?
That's putting you on the spot. And it would probably take us much more time than we have. We only have
That's
about
true.
5 or 6 minutes. So,
and Gabby did put in the chat, the place where you live and the people you live with and around you. It's great.
Yep. Yep. But what do you describe? And what is important in that? And what Bronfenbrenner did was start with the idea of a developing person. And that person is in an ecosystem, developing and adapting and developing understanding and skills by exploring and maintaining the environment. And we participate in activities. So it's important to describe, in Bronfenbrenner's view, the kinds of activities we engage in. I'm going to skip through a whole bunch of things here and summarize the important elements. Okay. If you're a develocologist, it's the physical characteristics of the settings that you participate in, the kinds of activities you engage in, the skills you develop doing those activities, the kinds of relationships you have with other people. Now, I hope as I go through this list, your brain is beginning to get boggled a bit. How do I think about all of those things? Well, that's the researcher's issue. That's our problem. The connections between the settings. So the connections between your home and your school and your sports team, your church, or wherever else you are. And sometimes it's what happens in a setting that you don't go into. Okay? But it affects what happens to you. The classic example of that is if your parents work outside the home and you never go where they work. What happens to them there is important to what happens to you at home. Okay? Maybe it's the money they bring in, maybe it's the stress they bring home. Okay? And then we need to understand how you understand the ecosystem and your ability to adapt to new ecosystems. Okay? So this is what this new science is about. What are the important physical characteristics of settings? Okay. What are the skills? Okay. And people are making a lot of progress in defining the things that are important in different ecosystems and to different people. What we use Develecology for is what I'm really interested in. We can understand how experience shapes the development. We can also begin to understand how our experience contributes to developing problems. We can design experiences that might help our development. And we can design experiences that might help reduce the development of problems. Now, designing experiences there means changing ecosystems. How do I change an ecosystem in a community so that fewer people start smoking, or so that fewer people die of drug abuse, or so that parents have more support for raising their children? Okay. So what we're using it for is to try to solve some of the human problems. And it's a very exciting approach. I'm working on trying to improve the healthcare system so that it helps people develop. And it's a young science. It's evolving rapidly. There's room for exploration. There's room for new applications of it, exciting opportunities. So think about what you want to learn, to understand and do. Do you want to help people? You want to solve human problems? And you all might be interested in studying Develecology. And I appreciate the attention and your responses and the opportunity to talk to you about it. I'll be happy to stick around and answer questions.
That was
Lauren?
great. Thank you so much. So before we get to final questions, I'm going to pop up a poll. There's 2 questions. If you could just take like 30 seconds to answer the questions. It's a scale of 1 to 5. How'd you like tonight's cafe? And did you learn anything? So rate knowledge. 5 is obviously the best. It's anonymous. We don't know what you say, but the feedback is really important to us. So I'm going to just give it a second till I see that most people right now, there's only a few of you who've done this. So please, everyone, take this poll, and then we'll have a few minutes to be able to answer any questions you might have. I'm going to keep this poll open. Right now, only about half of you have done the poll, so please do both questions. I would greatly appreciate it. It's really important for us to get this information. I'm going to leave it up for about 30 more seconds. There's still a few more of you that I would like to answer the poll questions. Again, it's anonymous. We have no idea what you're saying. So I'm going to just, you need help. So Gabby, I can't help you with it, but if you can see the questions, you could just put your answer in the chat if you want. All right, I'm going to close the poll and we will take any questions. If you want to ask your question by raising your hand, we can unmute you, or you can put your question in the chat box. All right, Ruth has a question. Ruth, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm wondering if you have, if you're interested in Develecology, like what kind of job you could get, and also like what job you have specifically, Lawrence.
It's a great question.
Yeah. Right now, there are no jobs for people that, if you open the newspaper, you won't find jobs for develecologists. But what you will find are a wide variety of jobs where develecology is the kind of background that you need. And that includes social work, early childhood educators, particularly, counselors, people who work in residential treatment programs, people who work in community development, just about
4-H people.
4-H, yes, indeed. Youth services in general, working with young people, working with in poverty programs, helping kids who are growing up poor to have the kinds of experiences that will help them develop the skills that they need for being more successful. Okay.
Great. Sterna, you can unmute yourself.
And Carly has her hand up too.
Hi, are you looking at how climate change and the stresses of like heat and flooding are affecting people's development?
Yes, I'm personally not doing that, but other people in the field are. They're quite interested in what's happening with communities that are going to be flooded out, or where agriculture is no longer productive because of climate change. So there are people who are interested in how people are adapting to that and how you continue to create an environment that supports people's development, even as the climate is changing, their ecosystem is changing. That's a great question, and it's a really complex field.
And Carly, you can unmute yourself.
So I was wondering, how many years have you been doing this, and how many people have you actually changed their lives?
Well, I've been teaching, formally teaching Develecology for about 25 years. And all of the students in human development and family studies at the University of Vermont have 2 courses that introduce Develecology. One focuses on family and the other focuses on the community. And then they use it through the rest of their career. We have no specific numbers, but we get regularly people who tell me that they use it every day in their jobs. They understand the world differently than other people do. They're more successful in their jobs because they can use Develecology. They ask different kinds of questions. And a couple of things. We've had a lot of communication recently. One of the things that we hear from many students is that after they've had the training in how to use a develecological perspective,
Oh no, I think he froze. Is it just me? Did he freeze for anyone else? Okay. Let's see if he can unfreeze. If not, we may just have to end because, oh, there he is. So Larry, you just froze for about a minute.
okay.
So you may want to, you were saying in the 25 years at UVM, people like ask better questions and so.
Yeah, the important feedback we get is that once you learn to think in this develecological way, once you have that framework, the perspective, it's applicable everywhere, and people say they can't not use it. They have to think this way because it's so useful. It's a great way of understanding life. And many of our students say that everybody should learn it because it's so important to them.
That's great. Let's go to Gabby, and I think this might be our final question based on the time.
So okay, I'll try to be quick because I know we don't have much time. Actually, never mind. But thank you for doing this, and yeah, thanks.
Okay, Gabby.
Gabby, thank you. And Gabby, if you think of your question, you can always email me and I can get it to Professor Shelton, who can respond to you. So I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I especially want to thank Professor Shelton for teaching us about develecology, and hoping some of you might decide to pursue that path when you get to college. It sounds really interesting and fascinating, and maybe you'll read the professor's book one day. So with that, I hope to see you all at our in-person cafe on October 16th, and then our next virtual cafe is at the end of October. So hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, and thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Bye-bye.